Eternights is an upcoming action RPG with dating mechanics similar to Persona and is releasing September 12th for PC and PlayStation 4 and 5 consoles. I've been wildly excited for this title the last few years, and today is the day I can finally announce to you all that I have a review copy of the game. And I've been looking so forward to sharing details beyond the trailer with you in hopes that you'll either buy the game or get just as hyped for its release as I am. I'll be covering this game in the most spoiler-free way as I can, so you can experience this for yourself as fresh as possible, but keep in mind there are a few mechanics I do need to cover to ensure you get a full picture. In short though, if you're an anime nerd, I can't express in words how much this game will resonate with your soul, possibly like none other. First off, if you're considering buying this, I need to tell you some important things that I feel are critically important for new players, but please don't let this stuff tarnish your view without watching the rest of what I'll be talking about today. The first thing you'll need to keep in mind with this game is that this was almost nearly completely created by one person, with only a few caveats that occurred much later into development. From interviews, it is also his first major game. So with that in mind, this game is not as polished as what some might be expecting. If you played the demo, you're mostly already in the know with this, but for those of you who are saving yourselves until the full release, I really need you to keep in mind it is 100% a very indie title. Not everything about that is bad though. Indie titles like this one don't have the budget, team, and resources as big titles do, but they do nearly have an unconstrained ability to tell a story in the way they choose to without worrying about a bunch of bean counters and such limiting their expression. As I will talk about later, this game uses that to its advantage to its almost absolute fullest and makes an experience I was so glad to have experienced. I've also talked a little about this before, but yeah, this game is crazy perverted. I'm not saying there's nudity or anything that pushes extreme boundaries, but at its core, this game comes from a very realistic teen mind. Is it a bit immature? Absolutely! Do you have wild, bonkers responses that you can give your teammates? 100%. Is there at times an excessive amount of innuendo and coarse language? Oh hell yeah, there is! It is overall an incredibly ecchi game that is also blended with some really personal stories and character development. If you're like me, it's going to be so refreshing, and that's what's going to make you have some chuckles, laughs, and to be corny, some knee-slapping what moments. I say this because I know it's not for everyone, especially with what a lot of Western gamers are used to, but if you like the bulk of Japanese gaming, you're gonna feel so at home with this one. So what the heck is the game about? I'm not gonna go into spoilers, but Eternights in the most base sense is essentially a road trip with new and old teenage friends maneuvering across an apocalypse trying to save humanity. The world has changed into a barren, destroyed landscape filled with monsters, comprised of sick humans that have undergone some wild transformations. The main character starts off with his biggest worries being what he's going to do on his dating app, but soon after he ends up locked in a bunker to later get released, and then he realizes the world as he knows it is gone. As with any good main character, you're given a great power to fight the monsters, and then later after that, you're given an idea of how you might stop the threat overall as the main bad is introduced and the adventure begins. It's not anything wildly unique or even refreshing, but the devil is in the details on this one, and as you continue your journey, you're going to get a lot more hooked on this than you'd probably expect from the first hour or two of gameplay. In my opinion overall, I actually feel like this game is a weird twist of Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne in Persona 3. When I say weird, I don't mean bad, I just think it's odd for a lot of Nocturne players, myself included, to imagine a game like Nocturne, notable for not having a lot of character depth, to have a dating mechanic attached to it that brings a lot of character depth and lightheartedness. The world itself is bleak, dark, and barren. Everything feels so focused on the atmospheric that it really genuinely made me feel like I did with Nocturne in a lot of ways. The game really toes this interesting and frankly refreshing line between being silly and immature while also being brutal, uncaring, and esoteric. The game is really marketed and talked about as being a Persona-like game, but I don't exactly feel like that's accurate for this game. There's definitely a lot of inspiration, and players of both SMT Mainline and Persona games will get the inspiration part, but really to my relief, the game doesn't copy and paste anything from those titles, and instead just lightly nods at them while being an original experience. It's not what I expected at first, but it was incredibly appreciated as I played the game more. The characters in this game are all really great. I won't be overly specific with this, but I felt the roster of cast was well balanced and there's a lot of mystery and depth with most of them. If you played the demo, you know there's a pop star and there's the goofy best friend, but as you play, you encounter other characters both in the world and also in another dream world, which I can only compare to being like Persona 3 with Igor in the Velvet Room or the mysterious boy who comes to you in your dreams. Side note, I know who the mysterious boy is, okay? It's just not relevant to what I'm talking about. Outside of your best friends, you don't really know a lot of the backgrounds of the characters, and in the Reddit AMA I covered, the dev talked a bit about how he really wanted each character to really be a major part of the game, to the point he got some outside help for building them out. The results were astronomical. The characters all come off as really unique, and unlike Persona, I had a hard time choosing who I wanted to relationship build with. Each character has an introductory story they tell up front that gives you a strong idea of what their background might be, while also creating some mystery behind what they aren't telling you. And like reality, their past shape how they act in current time. I can firmly say these characters matter to me in the game sense, and along with the necessity of building character relationships for combat boosts, I genuinely wanted to experience everyone's stories. On top of that, this game really was something else, as there is so many dialogue options I had the hardest time choosing between. You'd think I mean it was tricky to identify the best option, but no. Some of the answers are so cheeky, I felt so compelled to choose them, and sometimes you even have multiple cheeky answers that compete with each other. Again, it's hyper immature, but I'm going to throw it out there and say that not only did I choose these options half the time, the responses I received from choosing them made it feel 1,000,000,000% worth it. I can't say how many times in Persona I had some jackass thing in my head I'd rather to say, only to obviously not have the options to do so. The game feels like a power fantasy in that regard. As far as the gameplay goes, I really think the concept was a mix between visual novel and action RPG. Don't let that turn you off, as this game is paced really well, even at the beginning, where most story-heavy games generally suffer the worst. I mean, of course there's a lot of dialogue and cutscenes and moments where you're talking, but the pacing feels right, as if there's a lot of diversity in how it's all shown. It's pretty common during dialogue that other visual changes are happening, or something randomly occurs during a conversation like an emergency. There's a few different visual styles that are used throughout the game to tell a story. For example, when a character is talking about their past, they use a really cool sketch, storybook type visual with different coloration than what you have in base gameplay. Characters often change their locations during dialogue too, or it's broken up as little story segments between dungeons. To my initial surprise, there's also some wildly awesome cutscenes in the game which are fully animated, the quality of which matches what we saw in Persona 5. It was pretty shocking and awesome, and the dev in the AMA talks about how he hired and worked with a Korean animation studio to get those done. Much less used, there's also some really great moments in the game that are definitely inspired by Persona 5, where the visuals of major events happen in tandem and in time with some really impressive musical scores. That stuff verges on spoiler territory, so I'll say no more, but the music-based segments, while sparse, were a huge addition to making this game feel really impressive despite its lack of overall polish. After the opening sequence of the game, where we move into the more standard gameplay loop, the game offers what you might expect, but with enough diversity to keep you on your toes. Every section of the game gets pinned into a timeline where you have X many days to complete the major objective, and you're able to use that time as you please. Having spent a number of hours with Persona, the concept was very familiar, and I did my usual, which was blast through the objective and then settle back to do the character developing content while I waited for time to expire. I did find initially this was really only doable on easy mode though. Each character has a bond level as well as other activities you can do with them to kill time, and every time you level your bond you get access to more abilities. You need a currency to buy these new abilities too, so there's other activities for that to take place. The game felt heavily designed around these relationship bonds taking place, so if you try to bomb rush a dungeon on higher difficulties, you won't have a very easy time if you skip the relationship building, and likewise, if you focus on relationships, you can achieve better results in the dungeon, but might feel a bit cramped on time. The choice is really yours though. I suck at the combat, and on easy was still able to do my bomb rush and relationship later with minimal issues. The relationship building was a bit more robust than I expected, and also a bit more skill-based than I expected, but I stumbled through it, making it work. The first female relationship you can build has the option to spend time with her, scavenge with her, or practice with her. The spending time part is really self-explanatory, but the scavenge mechanic finds you pinned in a room with her looking for a specific item in a certain time limit, and the practicing was initially a pretty tricky minigame involving breathing that actually took me longer than I'd like to admit to fully understand and succeed well at. The version I played unfortunately had no or very little tutorials for a lot of the minigames, but I'm told that's something the dev has included on the release build of the game. They may be challenging, but they aren't impossible even for a weakling like me, so you should be fine with anything that comes your way. I kind of avoided it so far, but the dungeons are a big part of the game, and overall they are mostly serviceable. To me, it's fair to say they aren't really anything wildly special for the bulk of what you do. It's usually just you moving from area to area, getting locked into certain spaces to fight enemies, and then you're allowed to move forward. To break up the monotony, there's puzzle rooms, which come in a few different varieties the farther you get into the game. I won't spoil them, but I will say that they aren't anything too complex for the most part, but some can be tricky. I honestly think the idea was to break up the repetition, and for the most part they do that really well, especially the farther you go into the game. The shining star of the dungeons are the bosses and mid-bosses though. They usually throw something at you that is rather challenging but also fun, and it pushes the narrative farther as well as changes the pacing a bit. Oh, and to make the dungeons more traversable, there's little cards you find that allow you to teleport from one area to the other, or even return to the base if you're tired and running low on resources. Not to be a liar, but I think the combat is middling. I know it's an action RPG, so for some that's a huge deal, but I don't think the combat is exactly groundbreaking. Initially, the game seems really brutal, and I know there's a lot of feedback on the demo that even on easy the game was rough, but I kind of think the beginning of the game is kind of the hardest part. The biggest reason why is because you don't have as many characters or as many skills, and what you do have is the base level. Again, this reminds me of SMT Nocturne, where you're kind of pinned into a corner at the beginning and forced to learn the base mechanics as best as you can to succeed. As you continue playing and building relationships, which add more skills and buffs, the game feels a lot more achievable. I personally think people are going to be kind of on both sides of that one. Some people love the style of design and some hate it. I felt like that the initial struggle wasn't the worst, but again, I kind of babied out quick and dropped it to easy from normal just to make sure I got through more content faster as a reviewer. In continuing playthroughs though, I'd love to try out the whole game on normal or even hard with the knowledge I have now that it's kind of the worst at the start. To be clear, when I say start, I'd say that covers the first part of the first dungeon. It's really not that long, but the demo didn't cover that much, so I get why some people felt the way they felt about the difficulty. The actual mechanics are fairly simple. You have a button to attack and a button to dodge. As you do so, you can earn points which build up and allow you to use a skill aligned with yourself or later a partner. If you dodge at the right time, which is actually fairly lenient, you'll slow time down, which is basically mostly a necessity as it allows you to get a series of hits in on enemies. With the basic attack, every 3 or so hits in a row allows you to do a powerful combo attack. As you progress, you gain access to other attacks, the first being a slower but heavier attack, and the slowdown is essential to getting a strong combo of heavy attacks off, which leads you to a pretty awesome combo. There's more to this, but I don't want to get too deep, so you can have the chance to discover this on your own. But it's safe to say the longer you play and level relationships, the more exciting combat gets. The skills are especially cool as once you break the enemy shields, you get some opportunities to lay down some fun combo QTE attacks that are devastating, and again, the longer you play, the more these become common. By the time you hit Act 3, you really feel like you're getting somewhere with the combat, and it's a lot more fun than the first 2 acts of fighting. To sum this all up, this game has a lot to offer and is a lot more unique than many would expect. It's definitely not a totally polished huge title with a lot of pizzazz, but it offers some really memorable moments and develops characters in wonderful ways that really makes me highly recommend this game. I received a review key for the game, but all thoughts are my own, which might sound weird because I feel like I gush so much about this game, but I think it deserves it. It's a fairly niche game. I can't say it's for everyone, but if you're like me, this game is really going to resonate with you, and the lack of polish isn't going to be a concern. Indie games have been around long enough, I feel like it's safe to say it's not a bad word anymore, and games like this really wear that with a badge of honor and make the most of it. I look forward to releasing more content through the game's release, and hope this video offered a well-rounded opinion of the game to you. If you want to see more anime news, reviews, gaming, and continuing coverage of Eternights, feel free to subscribe, hit the thumbs up or thumbs down, and let me know in the comments how you feel about Eternights. Check out the links in the description to get your game yourself, or check out the demo and form your own thoughts.